The Last of Us Part 2 is the most divisive game of 2020, and possibly this generation of consoles. Shortly after its release on June 19th, the internet exploded with critics and fans alike sharing their love or absolute hatred for this game. I stand firmly on the love side of this debate, so that's what we're here to talk about today. I'd like to share my thoughts on the game and the controversy surrounding it, and why I believe that The Last of Us Part 2 is a worthy sequel to Part 1. Side note, if you were so upset with the outcome of this game that you chose to harass and or threaten the creators and actors behind it, our dog Roxy has a message for you. You may be saying to yourself, Gooba, this game came out like 3 months ago. No one is talking about The Last of Us 2 anymore. Well, I didn't have a YouTube channel then, so we're doing this now. Now, before we get started, I would like to make it clear that this will be somewhat biased. I am a huge Naughty Dog fangirl. The Last of Us Part 1 is my favorite video game of all time, and the Uncharted series is also high up on my list. I also, like many of you, grew up playing Crash Bandicoot. I own all this stuff. I bought this steelbook for The Last of Us Remastered that was only released in Germany and cost more than the game itself. I pre-ordered the Ellie edition of Part 2 because apparently I needed this replica backpack that I don't use and is currently stuffed in the back of my closet. For God's sake, my avatar on our channel logo is wearing a fucking Firefly t-shirt. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the story. Obviously, major spoilers ahead, so if you haven't finished the game, go do that and come back. I'll wait. I'm gonna put like a few seconds of silence there. I thought that'd be funny. By far the biggest point of contention with most fans was the brutal death of our favorite video game dad, Joel Miller. We were introduced to Joel in Part 1, and he quickly became a fan favorite for basically everyone who played. He wasn't your run-of-the-mill tough guy protagonist that we've gotten used to in many video game narratives. He had some depth to him. We saw his journey from grieving father to ruthless killer that does whatever is necessary to survive, to father again to his surrogate daughter Ellie. So seeing him killed so viciously by this girl that we don't know, that we've played as for a good chunk of the game so far, that Joel saved from a horde of infected, had pretty much everyone, myself included, reacting like this. But here's where I'm going to lose some of you. Whether we like it or not, Joel's death was warranted, and he knew that. He was a beloved character, so it seems like everyone wanted him to have this hero ending where he saves Ellie and goes out in a blaze of glory. But Joel's past actions did not set him up for an honorable death. Joel made the selfish decision at the end of Part 1 to kill 100 Fireflies, including a doctor trying to save the world, to save Ellie, because after 20 years, he had allowed himself to care for someone again, and he didn't want to lose that. But Joel definitely knew his time was limited after that. He knew that there were still Fireflies left as he fled the hospital, and that one day they may come for revenge. Or if it wasn't the Fireflies, it could be someone else from his past. Joel's history between the outbreak and when he meets Ellie is still pretty ambiguous, but one thing that is known is that Joel crossed a lot of people. Possibly even some innocent people. I think that Joel knew he was on borrowed time, so he chose to take Ellie back to Jackson so that they could both have a sense of community and at least try to live a somewhat normal life until his past came back for him. Another issue people had with Joel's death is that it doesn't make sense for Joel and Tommy to trust Abby, who they just met, and go back to her group's hideout. Well, let's think about it this way. In the last 5 years, Joel has allowed himself to let his guard down. He's part of a community that respects him, and he has opened up his ability to trust people. And it seems like Jackson is no stranger to new residents or visitors traveling through. So Joel and Tommy choosing to save Abby is perfectly reasonable, considering they're stuck in the same predicament, and this person, who in their eyes is probably just a traveler, may be able to help them get out of it themselves. Them choosing to go back to her group to escape the horde makes total sense, as the alternative is probably being eaten alive. Even when they first get to the lodge, their interactions with Abby's group are pretty friendly. Tommy asks how long they've been there because, to them, it's just another group of survivors passing through. It's only when Joel reveals his identity that the group realizes who he is, and in turn, Joel realizes what he's walked into. At that moment, I think Joel knows that someone from his past has come back to haunt him. That's why after he's been shot and he's face to face with Abby, he doesn't plead for his life, he doesn't threaten her, he doesn't even bother to ask who she is, because he knows that it's someone that he's wronged and that his time has come. He accepted his fate the day he took Ellie from the hospital. After Ellie witnesses Joel's death, the plot of the game seems to be revenge, with Ellie and Dina heading out to Seattle to find Joel's killer. The next 3 days are basically a wild goose chase across the city, hunting down leads on Abby's location and killing whoever stands in Ellie's way, which happens to be most of Abby's crew that accompanied her to Jackson. This journey culminates with Ellie killing Owen, the man Abby loves, and Mel, who, unaware to Ellie, is pregnant. Ellie struggled with her decisions along the way, but this is the first time that we truly see the effect that all this killing has had on her. It's from here that Ellie starts to realize the weight that her actions have on her, and that she will have to let Abby live so that she can get Dina, who is also pregnant, safely back to Jackson. Until Abby shows up and kills Jesse and confronts Ellie for killing everyone she loves. Now at this point you, like me, are probably looking at Abby and thinking, "You're gonna fucking die!" However, Ellie now knows that Abby was a Firefly and believes her reasons for killing Joel was because he stopped them from making a vaccine. It's now that we're pushed into a flashback of Abby 4 years earlier. I thought it was 5 years after the first game, but whatever, the timeline is bananas. We see a young Abby with her dad free a zebra trapped in barbed wire when Owen shows up in Firefly gear. This is not a huge surprise because at this point we already know that they used to be Fireflies. Owen tells Abby's dad that he is needed back at base because a girl with an old bite mark that Marlene keeps talking about has been found in the tunnels. It's here that you find out that Abby's dad was the doctor who was supposed to operate on Ellie at the end of the first game, the doctor Joel killed. You're forced to experience Abby finding her father's body, and then the screen cuts to black and you see Seattle, day 1. Now, if you're like me, this was a real What the fuck moment. You're telling me I have to relive the same 3 days as the girl that killed Joel? Like, I understand why she did it now, but I still don't like her. But this is where the real goal of the game comes in. Naughty Dog has tasked you with keeping alive this person that you hate, and experiencing the last 3 days from their perspective. You have to learn to empathize with the villain of the story, and see the results of all the heinous acts that you just took part in as Ellie. And along the way you get to know Abby and her history with the people around her, and see the struggle that she went through in the years following her father's death. She was on the same path that Ellie is now, consumed by hatred and her quest for revenge on the person who killed her own father, to the point that she lost her relationship with Owen, the respect of her peers, and lost herself along the way. Her story is actually a cautionary tale for Ellie that if she stays on the path that she's currently on, not only could she lose the people around her and herself, but it may not even help her in healing. As we see several times during Abby's 3 days, even after completing the mission that she committed years of her life to and finally killing Joel, her nightmares haven't stopped and she doesn't feel closure for her dad's death. It's not until she saves the lives of the 2 Seraphied kids, Yara and Lev, who saved her life, that she starts to move on from the pain in her past and sees that there is still hope for the future. Now, by going AWOL to find Owen and saving these kids, who are part of the enemy faction in Seattle, she has turned the entire WLF against her, but that's okay, because she's ready to leave Seattle with Owen, Yara, and Lev, and try to find the remaining Fireflies in Santa Barbara. That is, until Ellie killed Owen. So now Abby is on the revenge trail again, and we're back at the theater, except this time, you're playing as Abby, and you're trying to kill Ellie. Naughty Dog is giving you the most difficult task yet, by asking you to try to kill the protagonist while playing as the villain. And yeah, of course it's uncomfortable, you don't want to do it, but I think that was the point. You're supposed to be conflicted because although you love Ellie, you've seen the world from Abby's eyes, and you've experienced heartbreak right along with her, and you understand why she's doing it. Although Abby takes on the villain role again by holding a knife to Dina's throat even after finding out she's pregnant, Lev is there to stop her, which in turn makes Abby realize that more violence will not bring Owen back and will only push her further from moving on and starting the next chapter of her life. With that, Abby lets Ellie and Dina live again and walks away in hopes of them never seeing each other again. We cut to a farmhouse roughly a year later where Ellie, Dina, and baby JJ are living comfortably, but it becomes evident very quickly that Ellie is still struggling to cope with Joel's death. She's having PTSD flashbacks, and things are only made worse when a much worse off than we last saw him Tommy pays them a visit and informs Ellie that a recent visitor to Jackson traded with Abby and Lev out in California. Dina wants to move past this, but Tommy feels cheated because when they got back to Jackson, Ellie promised him that Abby would pay for what she did. Having lost an eye and the use of one of his legs, Tommy can't go himself, and we come to find out that he and Maria are separated, so he has also lost his relationship. He's basically lost everything and is bitter that Ellie and Dina are living comfortably in the country. With that, Ellie leaves once again to find Abby, even though Dina makes it clear that she will not wait for Ellie to come back. This was a particularly divisive part of the game. Either you're upset with Ellie for giving up a happy, peaceful life, or you never empathized with Abby at all and you're excited because this means Abby is finally going to get hers. But before we get to see Ellie's California adventure, we got to check in on Abby and Lev. They hunt down an old Firefly hideout in Santa Barbara and communicate with a man on the radio who claims to be a part of the large Firefly community on Catalina Island. Before they can confirm if this group is real or not, they're ambushed and taken prisoner by a stereotypical biker gang called the Rattlers. Basically like the Claimers crew from The Walking Dead, if you remember them. We return to Ellie, who just landed in Santa Barbara and is following the trail left by Abby and Lev. After fighting off a few infected, she's caught in a trap set by the Rattlers and consequently impaled on a tree branch because of it. When the Rattlers show up to cut her down, she fights them off and finds out that Abby is being held at their base by this guy who describes Abby as having arms like mine, which I thought was really funny. An injured but still determined Ellie fights her way through the Rattler compound and releases a group of prisoners who inform her that Abby tried to escape and is being held at the pillars on the beach. Ellie stumbles her way down there to find a sunburnt and broken Abby strung up on a pillar. Ellie cuts her down, and Abby quickly releases Lev from his pillar and tells Ellie there are boats on the beach. At this point, Ellie's bleeding heavily from her abdomen and can barely walk, and upon getting to the boats, Ellie takes her bag to the boat opposite Abby. For a brief moment, it almost feels like Ellie is done fighting and will let Abby leave. But after seeing the blood from her wound on her hand, Joel's bloodied face flashes into her mind and reminds her one more time of what Abby did to her surrogate father. At this point, Ellie confronts Abby, who is tired of the violence and does not want to fight her. But Ellie, who is still completely consumed by her grief, pulls a knife on Lev and essentially forces Abby to one final fight. This fight is devastating. Both characters are a shell of their former selves, and unless you've completely missed the point of the story up to this point, you don't want either to lose. I've never felt so conflicted about a button prompt before, and I think that was the point. Naughty Dog wants you to be uncomfortable and question what you're doing, because that is what both characters have been doing this entire time. Ellie has been battling her own emotions since Joel's death because she was never truly able to forgive him for not letting her choose her own fate at the end of the first game. It's not until she's won the fight and is holding Abby underwater waiting for her to drown that Joel flashes into her mind again. Not as a bloody pulp this time, but healthy and alive, playing guitar on his porch, at peace. I think this is Ellie realizing that killing Abby is not going to stop the nightmares and that it's not what Joel would have wanted. Even though he may have lost sight of it at this point, get it, because he lost an eye? Tommy even confirmed that the day after Joel's death. She needs to find a way to forgive Joel in order to move on with her life. She lets Abby go, and we see Ellie sitting in the water as Abby and Lev float away on a boat. It's not a happy scene by any means, but there's a glimmer of hope for both characters as they finally put the violence behind them and go their separate ways. We see Ellie return to the farmhouse to find it empty, and Dina and JJ gone. She doesn't seem surprised by this. On the contrary, it seems like she expected it. What does remain is Ellie's art studio and her guitar. She tries to play Future Days one more time, but having lost 2 fingers in the fight with Abby, she can no longer play. This takes us to one more flashback of the night before Joel's final patrol, the night of the dance where Ellie and Dina kissed for the first time, and Joel defended Ellie's honor to homophobic bigot Seth. Fuck you, Seth. After Ellie confronts Joel about interfering at the dance and with her patrols, the subject shifts to Joel's decision at the hospital in Salt Lake. It's here that we finally hear Joel's thoughts on what he did, and he confirms that despite Ellie's anger with him and the consequences that will eventually come, he would do it all over again. Joel chose to save Ellie's life because it meant more to him that she live on a long, happy life than the fate of humanity. We see that although Ellie never fully forgave Joel, that she was willing to try to mend their relationship because at the end of the day, she still had love for him. This short conversation is part of the reason for Ellie's entire journey to Seattle. She had just entertained the thought of reconciling with Joel, then that opportunity was taken away. The entire journey was about the cycle of Ellie's grief. To say that the message of this game was simply revenge bad is simplifying a very complex and ambitious story. This game is about revenge in a sense, but it's also about love and loss and empathy and redemption. It's about what humanity looks like when society has collapsed. That's why the series is not called Joel and Ellie. It's called The Last of Us. The last of mankind and how we would interact with each other. That's why I think even if this game is the last one with Joel and Ellie and they continued the series with a completely new cast, which I don't think is the case, but I'm going to talk about that in a future video, it would still be just as compelling because the world itself sets the foundation for the narrative. I love this game, And although I don't think it's perfect, it was a well thought out, ambitious follow-up to the masterpiece that was Part 1. Thank you all so much for watching. This is a video I've wanted to make for a long time, and I put a lot of thought and effort into it. I intended on covering gameplay and other aspects of this game, but I had so much to say on the narrative that I thought it warranted its own video. So you can expect more The Last of Us videos in the near future. Comment your thoughts on this video and this game in general, and subscribe for more video game related content. And last but not least, thank you to Roxy for editing this video.